Thus, the year in which the grape was harvested and pressed does not matter in the same way it does for table wines, because you're always mixing liquid that was picked at different times. Hello there, my Hispano babies. Welcome to the Hispanophiles podcast. Travel in Spain with only half a brain. This is the podcast that still doesn't really know how it feels about bullfighting. My name is James Bruffery. I'm your host today, and in today's episode, we are going to be exploring one of my secret passions. Let's put it that way. One of my vilain d'angre. We are, of course, delving into the wonderful world of sherry, West Andalusia's glorious fortified wines that are tragically misunderstood nowadays. Everyone thinks it's a Christmas drink for your gran. I'm here to tell you all the history behind how they're made and how you best enjoy this little cup of golden sunshine. Of course, we're going to be delving first and foremost into our regular segments, so we're going to start with the Spanish vocabulary of the week. Recording in the end of January, here we've had quite an abnormally wet and cold January in Catalonia, where I'm recording from, and the new piece of vocabulary today is a suitable one for the weather we've had. Acurrucarse, to snuggle up or to curl up. A-C-U-R-R-U-C-A-R-S-E. So a reflexive verb, acurrucarse, to snuggle up with your loved one or with your cat or with a bowl of popcorn, wherever it may be, in some big manta, on your bed, on your sofa, watching whatever you choose to put on, or of course listening to the Hispanophiles podcast. Acurrucarse, a good one, hold on to it. We move on to the Spanish news story of the week. Now, here in Spain, we've had a few related and rather disturbing news stories about train crashes. We're not going to cover that today. We think it's been very well done elsewhere. I also don't want to lower the tone because we still don't fully understand what's going on. Instead, let's go to the story of a 3-day illegal, unlicensed New Year's Eve party in an abandoned warehouse that took place in a small town called La Sénia, which is on the border between Catalonia and Valencia, technically in Tarragona province, right in the south. Mixmag, that bastion of fantastic journalism, they picked up in this story. Somebody decided to organise a absolute bender going for several days in this abandoned Polígono Industrial, in this industrial complex in a small town, and they picked up some kind of van, put some speakers inside it, some fridges, loaded it up with drinks, and had a bar in this just abandoned warehouse. And it started on New Year's Eve. We don't know how long it was planned to go for. Only on 3 p.m. on January the 3rd did police apparently shut it down. 45 positive drug tests were taken during the crackdown. 27 counts of drug possession is what I've read in the report. Over 250 police officers in full riot gear went to close this thing down. Perhaps a bit overkill, but you never know what you're coming up against, I guess, if you're a serving police officer, so we have to give them the benefit of the doubt. After 100 complaints were lodged against the sound being produced by the illegal party by locals who eventually figured out what was going on. It was illegal because there was no license. This is not a licensed establishment to sell drinks and, of course, host people in such large numbers. This is 1,000 plus people. Of course, you need a license to be able to do that for various reasons, for health and safety, for ensuring that what you're selling meets certain hygiene standards when you're serving alcohol, that type of thing. But what's really fascinating about this is, of course, the various police chief officers reported negatively about this in the press, but the actual mayor of La Sénia, of the town where it took place, Victoria Almuni, she praised the cunning and clever organisation of the event organisers to find an abandoned warehouse and to put it in there well out of harm's way in an industrial estate that was accessible by road. She praised them for their ability to find a good location. How hilarious is that? Yes, of course, we can't be condoning illegal activities that could put people in danger. Like I said, there were some drug busts, but to have the mayor say, good job, guys, you did a good one there. Maybe she was a party girl once, I don't know. Victoria Almuni, if you're listening, if you want to go with me to Bergheim one day, drop into my DMs and I will book the Ryanair flights and we'll go this weekend, okay? Sounds good. We move on to the main segment, the sherry episode, one of my absolute loves in life. Again, like every episode, we like to pay homage to the literature which helps us in our preparation of every episode that we do. The main book today that proved useful was the book Sherry, written by Julian Jeffs, published by Infinite Ideas. This is the English language Bible of sherry. Everything you need to know about the drink, the industry, the people making the stuff, the people drinking the stuff. It's a phenomenal piece of work. 6 editions don't lie, all the way from the sowing the seeds to the harvest, and production, retail, global fashions of the drinks, the lot. Amazing book. If this is your thing, that's where I think you should go to get more information. This, of course, is not going to be an exhaustive episode about sherry. I'm not going to give you every single fact there is. The purpose here is for you to understand what is the drink, why does it come from Andalusia, what relevance is it in contemporary society, and if you want to try some, what would be the best way to go about doing it. Why do I love this stuff so much? The context. 2018, I'd finished my travel year when I was 27 years old, back in the UK, looking to find a way to move to Spain. I, therefore, was kind of living at home with my parents. I got a couple of service jobs in cafes, restaurants, one of which was at a place called Ambiente Tapas in Humber Street in the fine old city of Hull. I should point out this is not a paid sponsorship. They have not approached me or offered any money for me to give them promotion. But when I got a job in this Spanish restaurant Sherry Bar, these people were very, very good to me. They gave me the hours, they gave me opportunities, they trusted me, and as a consequence, I worked really, really hard to be the best waiter in the entire city, and it was a pleasure to work for them. I got a job there as a simple food server as I was waiting for medical treatment. I'm not going to go into that now. It was now serious, so don't worry. It was a Sherry Bar, and I took an interest because it was from Andalusia, where I had previously lived, and I kind of just found myself learning, researching, trying, sampling, doing everything I could to understand the wines, and I became the sherry guy. I became the most qualified there to be able to speak to people about how to drink it, how to taste it, and I loved it. For 50 months, that's what I was. When I went to Jerez de la Frontera during my time there, I was given a guided tour of bodega. I was asked to host sherry training sessions for newer staff in the restaurant in Ambiente, and that sparked my love for the drink that I carry to this day. Ambiente Tapas, thank you very much. Congratulations. It's over 10 years old now, the chain. Amazing achievement. It's still Yorkshire's best dining and wine experience as far as I'm concerned. After my health issues cleared up, I tried to get a job in a shady bodega in Jerez de la Frontera. I did not succeed, but I moved to Sevilla anyway, nearby, and I still got back to Andalusia. I guess we should start with a basic definition. What is sherry? Sherry is the name given to the fortified wines aged in the bodegas located in a small area of southwest Spain, in the area between the towns of Jerez de la Frontera, Sanlúcar de Barrameda, and El Puerto de Santa Maria, a place known as the Sherry Triangle. It used to include Cádiz, but that is now no longer the case. The aging, or elaboración, as it is known in Spanish, of the wine must be done inside the Sherry Triangle. The grapes used to make this wine can be cultivated and pressed outside of it, but it's never really done that far away, and it is normally done close to the bodegas anyway, and that is where the elaboration, the aging, takes place. That is as simple answer to the main question I can give. It poses the obvious follow-up question, which is, what is a fortified wine? As the name would suggest, any speakers of Latin or any Latin languages can tell you that is simply a strong wine, strong in every single sense of the word. They have a higher alcohol content than those that table wines or orthodox wines normally have. In the case of sherry, they range normally from 15.5 to 22% alcoholic proof, and below 15.5 it cannot be considered sherry for reasons we'll get into soon. Other examples of fortified wines would include port, Madeira wines, Pajarete, Malaga wines, that type of thing, because these wines are stronger in terms of alcoholic proof. They are consumed in smaller quantities, in smaller glasses, and fortification doesn't just change the flavour and the way in which you drink it. Fortification makes the wine more resistant to bacteria. Greater resistance to bacteria means that fortified wines can survive on longer journeys. This makes sherry good for long voyages, and you can see where I'm going now, particularly during the age of discovery. These were wines that you could stick in a barrel on your boat on the way to the New World to do whatever it is you're planning to do, and they would last. You would not have to drink every single drop within a week. Sherry, port, Madeira, Pajarete, all of these wines are from Andalusia and Portugal, places with high average yearly temperatures facing the water, so they do have a lot of humidity, places that bacteria can spread, and this is probably why in these areas fortifying wines became commonplace to protect them against soiling quickly so that humans could enjoy them for longer. I've not seen any literature that confirms that, but it makes logical sense. It makes plausible sense, and I assume that is the case. Distillation and doing things than wine other than just letting it age normally came from China originally through Baghdad and then travelled with the Moors to Spain. So that's what fortified wines are, but what makes sherry distinct from all the other ones we've just listed? Well, sherry, in spite of what everybody thinks, sherry enjoys a very wide spectrum of flavours within the generic term. Of all the wines you can ever try in your lifetime, and that is not a challenge by the way, the driest of the dry and the sweetest of the sweet belong to the name sherry. Like I said, fortified wine, taking whatever you have, making it stronger. So dry becomes super dry, sweet becomes super sweet. Sherry also has a denomination of origins, but unlike other fortified wines, the sherry mark carries more prestige. The denomination of origin was created in 1933 to protect the local bodegas and to make sure that their brand was not undercut by other companies in places like Germany, putting the name sherry on a bottle and selling a vastly inferior wine. In sherry, 3 grape varieties are predominant, and these are made specifically in bodegas. Next question, what is a bodega? It is a building in which you make sherry. If the building you are in has 4 of the following characteristics, you just might be in a bodega. An earth floor. Number 2, stone walls. High roofs held up by long columns dotted throughout the building. Small windows normally left open. Low light, that is a surprisingly important one, even though the wine stays inside barrels. Wooden doors, nice big heavy wooden doors. Bodegas are vast. They're like airplane hangars. These are big buildings, huge in terms of floor space and in terms of general capacity. Corridors between the rows of barrels that kind of exist like streets between the different collection of barrels either side. And these barrels are on their side, they're all horizontal, stacked in layers on top of each other. Normally about 3 to 5 layers going up into the air, and to ensure their stability, wooden blocks are stuck between the barrels to maintain rigidity at all times. This creates a very specific microclimate, which is cool, dark and humid, with the ground often being sprayed with water to ensure high humidity, particularly in summer months. Most of the ones in Jerez de la Frontera, Sanlúcar de Barrameda and El Puerto de Santa Maria were made in the 19th century, though greater scientific knowledge has changed a lot about the earlier steps in sherry manufacture. The aging process of the wine inside the barrels is still done in bodegas, and therefore maintaining that very specific microclimate is essential if the wine is to remain as delicious and popular as it is. They're often referred to by locals as cathedrals, and if you go to a bodega in Jerez de la Frontera, you often get a yeast smell throughout the air, which sounds disgusting, but I love the stuff. You really get it on your nose straight away. The must, the grape, delightful. I love it. So what of the grapes? I mentioned there were 3 prominent grape species used in the production of sherry. The main one, the one that accounts for 98% of the grapes produced, is Palomino Fino. The name is said to derive from the knight Fernán Yáñez Palomino. Palomino Fino used for drier sherries. Typical harvest is the first weeks of September, but it's getting earlier every year. Rising average temperatures being the reason. From Palomino Fino we go to Pedro Jiménez. These make sweeter wines, but the grape is yellow-green and goes an orange-brown when ripe and when picked. The Pedro Jiménez grape is in decline. It is becoming of increasingly low interest now for people making and consuming sherry. And most sweet wines nowadays are also just made with Palomino Fino. And the third main grape variety is the Moscatel, also used for sweet sherry manufacture. These are green but go a beautiful dark red when they go ripe. The name apparently derived from the Latin word for fly, which is musca. Again, una mosca in Spanish, musca is the Latin because of the frequent abundance of fruit flies, which have a particular taste in these delicious, succulent, sweet grapes. In 1868, 42 different grape species were listed as being those that sherry bodegas would take in to make their wines, but this has been consolidated over time and to the point where we have these three which form the backbone of sherry production, with the vast majority coming from the humble Palomino Fino grape. Pedro de Mec, something of a grandfather figure in sherry manufacture, led the introduction of science into viticulture in the 19th century to whittle away less successful grape species, and the grapes of sherry tend to have a minimum sugar content of 10.5 BOMI. So we know what a sherry is in basic terms, we know what a bodega is, we know what grapes are used. What about the geography and the climate? We mentioned Andalusia and Portugal being very specific with regards to weather patterns that favour fortification over the creation of regular table wines, and straight away we're going to jump back in time 70 million years ago. Why go that far? Tectonic pressure pushed up mountains in this part of the world on both sides of the Straits of Gibraltar. Part of that being, of course, the Rock of Gibraltar, and the other part being the Atlas Mountains, forming the spine of the Moroccan state. But the area directly north, what is now the river basin for the Guadalquivir River, this area was pushed down in what's called the Betic Depression. Betis, again, the Roman name for the Guadalquivir River. Nothing to do with Real Betis getting relegated yet again, the Betic Depression. And this tectonic pressure meant that this land was underwater for a lot longer than other parts of the land that now make mainland Spain. Thus, the banks of the Guadalquivir have a far higher calcium carbonate concentration in their soil. Calcium carbonate being another word for chalk. The bones and shells of former maritime creatures dead and gone millions of years ago now rest in the soil of this area and give us three specific categories that local farmers and people working in food production have to navigate. Arena, which is the word for sand, barro, mud, and albariza, which is the chalky grey-white soil that is most prized for those people looking to make sherry. Also known locally as tierra de anafas, tierra blanca or tosca, found primarily in the north and west of Jerez de la Frontera, the city. If you go to Google Maps, you can see the white soil as you focus on Jerez de la Frontera in the north and west parts of it, coming from the Latin for white, albus. So J.K. Rowling, that's what she called Albus Dumbledore. Albariza is made up of 30 to 80% calcium carbonate, very, very high. This makes the soil porous. Water can slip through easily. The remaining content of albariza tends to be clay and sand. When wet, albariza, very slippy. When dry, it is a fine powder. The white colour helps reflect sunlight, making it easier during the summer, during hot periods, for the water content to stay below and not evaporate. This region gets 640 litres of rainfall per year, the wet season being pretty much February, March, April. Water during this period, as it rains, as the rains come, slips through the albariza and collects in a very deep water bed. Then when May, June arrive and it gets hotter, the albariza soil bakes. That forms a very important function, which is to trap the water below, stopping it evaporating and making it so that it can still be possible to feed certain agricultural products. Now, the things grown in this part of the world have to have good, strong, deep roots. Not everything can be cultivated here with ease. In Cádiz, Sevilla, Huelva provinces, farmers are typically limited to things like sunflower, sugar beet cereals, olives. When it comes to grapes, a lot of grape species you'll see forming the backbone of vineyards in South Africa, Australia, Italy, France, they won't do so well here because of that. The average root depth is about 50 to 60 centimetres of the sherry grape species, but can go much deeper, up to 10 metres. Here, the average vineyard height above water is 100 to 150 metres above sea level, and apparently vines that are on the southeastern slopes ripen earliest in this region, but such an abundance of yearly sunshine, apparently 3,000 to 3,200 hours of sunshine per year, probably mean that the terroir of the grapes grown in the sherry region are far less of a factor in determining the ultimate quality of the wine produced and therefore the value and price. Sherry is not so dependent on vintage, on particular details regarding the land and season in which the grapes are grown. We will get to that shortly. The vineyards, most of them are owned by small private companies. A lot of these are families who have owned the land for a long time, cooperatives, small groups of people who know each other, who are neighbours, clubbing together to keep a business in their region going. The people picking the wines and owning the land, they will sell their grapes en masse to the bodegas, do the fun work, pressing and making the wine. Most of the grapes used in sherry manufacture are from Andalusia. Again, picking and using locally, obviously there's a degree of familiarity and tradition, but momentum and speed, getting the grape to the press after the harvest as quickly as possible, reduces the quantity, the share that will be spoilt purely as a consequence of drying out. There is no legal mandate from the Consejo Regulador. They don't mandate you have to have all your grapes from a particular province or particular area of Spain, but it's normal for the grapes to be from Andalusia. But between you and me, Andalusians are kind of like that, so it's to be expected from them that they would look to source local. What about the process of manufacture? This is where the beauty really lies. Ploughing. Done July to August, the hottest months for brand new vines. Agosta is the name of the process in Spanish, of course, clearly related to the word August. The plough is normally about 1 metre deep, with the purpose of removing old roots and weeds as well. And if no replanting takes place within 7 years, the farmer loses the right to plant vineyards in that field. That's ploughing, planting and maintenance January, the start of the rain season. The soil is levelled quickly as possible. Planting of the vines then takes place at the end of January. February, the soil is hoed. By the end of April, early May, earth is broken up yet again to about 18 centimetres of depth to fight weeds. I said April, May, but generally speaking, fighting weeds takes place throughout the year. Then come June, the new vines that have been planted, that's when they will first begin to bear fruit. That's when they will first start showing grapes. It is normally necessary to wait about 4, sometimes 3 years before you can have what's clumsily referred to by Julian Jeffs as a useful crop for sherry production. Basically to have something that will give you enough of a yield for you to actually bother sending it to a bodega to be considered for production. Come July, the earth is broken up yet again. This is to help fight evaporation. Effectively, any kind of tyre tracks, any build-ups, any ridges caused by wind in the vineyards between the vines, that's broken up to help have it as flat as possible to prevent the water disappearing. After 1 year, we get to October. This is when we start to inspect the vine health. Failed vines are removed as quickly as possible because, of course, they could take more water from the local waterbed, and we start to do more fertilisation. Traditionally, horse manure was used for this because Jerez de la Frontera, of course, very famed for its equestrianism, but nowadays peat, compost and mineral fertilisers are more common. Yeah, it's sad seeing traditions die sometimes, isn't it? But if it helps get me a nice bottle of sherry, I'm okay with cutting corners, with trying new things. The second year specifically, the vines are then grafted. Now, before doing this research, I wasn't too familiar with what a vine graft is. When it comes to wines, a graft is a small addition of a bud to the vine itself that is attached where the bark has been shaved off the vine. So you saw, you shave, you remove a bit of the harder bark outside the stem of the vine, and you deliberately add a bud to it that, in the case of Jerez, is sealed with wax. It's applied with wax so that the bud then grows. Even though it's been added to the plant, they fuse and it grows from it. In Jerez, the graft is added because it contains fungicide and healing hormones. It is not an act to try and increase the yield directly. It is to keep the plant, the vine, healthy and free from disease, the most common being phylloxera. The phylloxera being an aphid that eat and destroy wines. The most disastrous epidemic of phylloxera in the sherry country was in the 1890s. It wiped out many, many vines. I wasn't there then, but this is what I read. After grafting, we come to pruning. Debare y pulgar, the process specific to sherry. I'm not going to go into the fine details of debare y pulgar because it's not really necessary for this episode. The process is complicated. You remove dead leaves, dead twigs, dead branches, vines that are falling to the ground, whatever it may be. The cultivator needs to be very attentive to the development of every single vine, and this again is one of the elements of making sherry that must be done all year round and with complete vigilance. But if done well enough, the grapes grow, and finally, the bit we celebrate, the harvest. The harvest taking place August and September, we mentioned at the top of the episode. Increasingly it's coming into August because of higher average temperatures earlier in the season, but the tradition dictates the 8th of September, known as the Feast of the Nativity of Our Lady. This is the traditional day for the new vintage in Jerez. This is when harvest should be completed and then celebrated. The picking of grapes is surprisingly highly regulated by the Consejo Regulador. In the first year, any grapes picked, i.e. 12 months after the vine is first planted, those are used for distillation. In the second and third year, grapes picked then, those could be used for the manufacture of sweet wines only. In the fourth year, the grapes picked from a vine that is now 48 months old, those can be used for cheaper sherry, not for the most luxurious or deluxe labels in a bodega's range. And then going 5 years onwards, that's when the prestige wines, that's when the grapes for those wines are plucked and then used. González Bias, the biggest name in cherry manufacture, they don't use grapes from vines that are under 8 years old as a matter of course. There is no age limit to a healthy vine, that should be pointed out. There are some that are hundreds of years old to this day, that's not uncommon. But it is true that the yield from an older vine will decrease over time. Historically, vines younger than 20 to 25 years never gave first-class wines, but grafting has helped us bring forward the, let's say, prime maturity date of a sherry vine to give us a prestige high-quality wine quicker. In 2013, 80% of harvested grapes for sherry was done entirely by machinery. It used to be a traditional thing with the gitanos going and plucking grapes, putting them in baskets on their back and bringing them to bodegas, now done by machines. The growers, the people owning the land and cultivating, they sell to who are called the shippers, who are the next step down the chain. These are the people who begin inspecting, casting aside grapes that aren't any good, that are not desirable, and taking the first steps toward ensuring a good transition into wine. They will remove loose stalks, they will remove stones, rotten grapes, bits of dirt, that type of thing, before sunning the grapes. Now, this is another aspect to sherry manufacture that has changed with age and with the advancement of technology in the industry. Traditionally, the grapes were placed on grass mats in broad daylight and sunlight so that the water content of the grapes can evaporate slightly. 24 hours or less for Palomino Fino, for the grape that is predominant in the manufacture of dry sherries. For Pedro Jimenez and Moscatel, it is up to 3 weeks. They would be covered with mats overnight to protect from mildew, and any sign of rain, then they would be brought inside immediately. Sunning is now uncommon for Palomino Fino, but is often still executed for Pedro Jimenez and Moscatel. We know about bodegas, we know about the climate, the geography, the grapes, the Betic Depression, sorry Betis. We know about the harvest, pruning, grafting. Now it's time to actually do the fun work of getting that bottle of wine onto your dinner table. We'll start with the preparation of the must. It is not normal for a bodega to take grapes from a single vineyard. Most buy grapes from different vineyards, but they tend to have ongoing relationships with the people they buy grapes from, with the farms they buy grapes from, and they'll be consistently year to year going to the same people. We press, and the traditional method, again, another sacrificial lamb in the face of modern technology. The old method, the grapes will be brought inside to a lagar, L-A-G-A-R. These are wooden troughs about 5 metres wide, 0.6 metres deep, but no real limit to how long they can be. The average capacity, about 680 kilos in terms of weight, that's what I've been told. Large enough for one butt of must. What is must? It is the juice that flows from the lagar after the grapes have been pressed. The must is viscous, it's sweet to the nose, and a kind of green-brown colour. Butt of must is simply the traditional way of referring to a barrel of this liquid prior to fermentation, butt being a common historic name for barrel you'll see in literature, in historic documents, many places. Grapes from different vineyards are pressed separately before being combined in a later stage for sherry manufacture. Gypsum, known in Spanish as yeso, about 2 kilos, is added to the lagar to improve the must quality for Fino specifically without adding any additional acidic content. And then for labourers, known in Spanish as pisadores, get to work standing on the grapes inside the lagar. They wear very specific footwear. These guys aren't jumping in with their Ugg boots, trust me. Those are called zapatos de pisar. And this is also not something that you can buy in Foot Locker. They take the soles of their shoes and they stick in, probably per shoe, about 50 to 100 nails at specific angles. The purpose being to trap and collect the pips and stalks of the grapes and allowing the skin to collect over the sole. Pressing begins at midnight of the chosen day and continues to noon. This is a 12-hour job of having these four men, these four pisadores, walk slowly, trampling, pushing down on the grapes with those weird nail shoes in the soles. 12 hours of that hard work, my God. The reason they start at midnight is to avoid the vicious heat in Andalusia in September. The must is then passed through two subsequent filter steps to remove large bodies, again, small stones, dirt, that type of thing, before the must enters a cask. The remaining grape pulp. This is placed around a cylindrical steel screw that is 2 meters high, and a long strip of plaited grass is wrapped around it and turned constantly by more labourers to allow for more pressing out of juice from the pulp, basically. Farmers will know this. You want to squeeze every single penny out of what you're growing, rearing, slaughtering. Basic economics. The same is true in sherry. This grape pulp wrapped around the steel with the plaited grass over the top of it. This is called a pie, a foot. The pulp is wrapped around and tied and pressed as these labourers walk normally in a clockwise direction around it, pushing this down, repeated a couple times, to squeeze every drop of grape must out of the grape pulp. But like I said, mechanisation, the modern world, sadly the lagar, pressing method of old, is kind of dying out. The transition started in the 1960s, and González Villas nowadays process 1.5 million kilograms of grapes per day when it comes time to the press, in their press house, Las Copas. By this point we have the must, we have our grape juice. It's time to start fermenting. Oak casks we use traditionally. Nowadays it's often done in stainless steel with something around the area of a 50,000 litre capacity. When this was done in oak casks, they generally fill about 7/8. Why would they do that? Again, as fermentation takes place, a lot of carbon dioxide will be released, and if you overfill the butt, if you overfill the barrel, you're going to have an explosion at some point, and you're going to ruin not just your barrel, not just your floor, but you're going to ruin also, you're going to lose a lot of liquid. So they deliberately underfill the butts, or they used to when it was the traditional process. Wild yeasts appear at this stage, and they bring the alcohol content to 4%, but then die as a consequence of their own labour. They cannot survive the alcohol content higher than that. It is at this point the bodegas add very specific wine species that are a product of our scientific invention to continue fermentation. So the wild yeast do the legwork to push the wine so far, then more, let's say, professional yeasts added to get it further down the road. 3 to 4 days of intense fermentation. Then it cools and we go to the slower fermentation for about a fortnight at this stage. Smaller bodegas and some specialists still ferment in oak casks, but most of it is done in stainless steel. And also some of the barrels used by those bodegas going the traditional way, these will then be sold to whiskey distillers who like to use sherry aged casks in their manufacture because it can give a wonderful complexity to this whiskey as well. That's quite common. We have our must. It's alcoholic, but it's not wine yet. So what's the next step? Aging. Lay the stuff down, let it age. After 6 months, the person called the capataz, he judges each butt with a menencia. This is his specific job, testing the must to see how it tastes at this stage. What is a menencia? It is a specific tool used in the world of sherry to sample the drink. Basically a cylindrical cup that used to be made of solid silver on the end of a pliant stick that you dip into the cask, and in one swift movement you draw a sample of sherry that can be poured into a glass in a very elaborate way that looks fantastic when the person knows how to do it. Nowadays they're made of stainless steel, of course they are, but the first ever menencias, I am told, were made using bamboo. Thus, often in Sanlúcar de Barrameda, one of the places inside the Sherry Triangle, a drink of sherry can be referred to as a caña, a cane. Caña, for those of you who aren't familiar, is a measurement of beer in Spain. A small little glass is often referred to as a caña, a cane. But Andalusians, always being different, sometimes call their wine caña. The Capataz uses this Benencia to sample and categorise each different but also the Benencias are used in fairs, in events, trade shows, that type of thing, because they're elegant, they're traditional, and they're Andalusian. They bring a certain degree of legitimacy, of flair as well, to the process whereby you serve sherry. I've never used one. I've never used a Benencia. My former manager, Rob, shout out to you, mate. He had a go a couple of times. He got the hang of it, but there was, clean up on aisle 4 a couple of times. The word Benencia comes from avenencia, meaning a bargain. And apparently the Benencia was used in the past to draw up a sample that would be then used in negotiations when people looking to buy and sell would try and work out how good is this wine going to be. The Capataz, he will then, having sampled all of the musts inside the barrels, he will, on the outside of the barrel, mark with white chalk to indicate the wine category and quality. About 90% of the must judged at this stage by the Capataz is going to become sherry. Some is removed for distillation into brandy, also sold by many bodegas, and so the very bad butts, they become vinegar. Nothing is wasted if you can help it. If you can't take the must and make sherry, make brandy or vinegar and sell those regardless. The next step, something I never heard of before doing this research, racking off the lees. Does sound a little bit like a euphemism for the four-finger shuffle for jerking the turkey. But this is the process whereby you carefully transport must from one cask into another in order to leave the lees at the bottom. Lees, simply a collection of dead yeast cells, dirt, dust, small bits of grape skin, that type of thing. The solids inside the liquid stage that you want to leave behind so as to not contaminate and ruin the flavour of the eventual wine. By this stage, you can now finally say you have a wine. The alcoholic strength is checked at the stage. It's normally about 14 to 16%. It's necessary, like I said, to get it over 15.5. And to do that, 95% distilled wine will be used in order to get it over. So you just add a few drops. This does not change the flavour at all. It's better than using ethanol, for example. And after 2 weeks, the classification is repeated again to weed out any butts that are not suitable. With this done, with the Capataz now having finished his job, the butts are allowed to sit alone by themselves and not be disturbed for 2 to 3 years to mature, to develop qualities that are favourable in your wine before entering into the Solera Criadera system. And this is the real magic of sherry. The Solera Criadera system is a real distinguishing factor that makes sherries so distinct from wines around the world. Evidence from its use comes from the mid-19th century, but we can be quite confident it has been used older. We've just got no written evidence of it that has come to surface just yet. The goal of the Solera Criadera system is to ensure consistency in the wine. It's quite simply layers, or as the industry refers to them, scales, of barrels, each with a different age, of the same wine that gets transferred from one to another. So imagine you're making a very particular type of sherry. You need 5 scales. Scale number 1 will be the youngest. That will have the youngest wine. 2, slightly older. 3, older still. 4th, almost the oldest. And the 5th one will have the oldest. But it'll be the same wine going through the system over the course of its lifetime to produce what should be every year the exact same product. That can be whose taste, aroma, and qualities can be predicted and therefore marketed and sold for a profit. The choice of wood for these barrels is oak, normally from New Orleans, Missouri, or upstate New York. Experimentation in the past has led to lots of failure. No other wood seems to be as good. The tree has to be a minimum of 100 years old for it to be considered in a sherry Solera Criadera. But it's not used straight away. The wood needs to be treated for 5 years before it can be made into a cask. The people doing that need to make sure, the coopers, they need to make sure that you eliminate any bacteria that could contaminate the wine that's going to be placed into the cask. The scales, going back to the layers inside the Solera system, these are separated inside the bodega. It's not literally young on top of old, one on top of another. You go to bodega, all the barrels in one particular part of the building will be one particular scale for one particular wine, and then the next row, the next street inside the bodega you go down, you will see another scale for the same wine, but a couple of years older. It's not literally one on top of another. The barrels are never cleaned. They're always reused. When it comes to transferring the wine from one scale to another in a solera, 2/3 of that cask, of that barrel, the wine is extracted, and then it's put into the next one. So of the first scale in the solera, you take 2/3 of that and you put that into scale number 2. You can do that because you've already taken 2/3 of scale number 2 and you've put it into scale number 3, all the way down until number 5. You've taken 2/3 out and you've bottled it. So this is how it works. The scales sit there and the wine graduates. That's probably a good word to describe this, from one to the other each year. The remaining third, this is where the magic takes place. I don't know the physics behind this, I don't know the chemistry, but the younger wine added, the 2/3 coming from cask 1, when it joins what's in the 1/3 in cask 2, it is the mature wine, as is the case in life, that dominates, that has the seniority and the authority, and the younger wine will absorb the colour, texture, aroma, bouquet, flavour, and then over time, everything inside that scale, inside that barrel number 2, will be the same liquid. Thus, the year in which the grape was harvested and pressed does not matter in the same way it does for table wines from France, Chile, Argentina, Italy, because by the very nature of this Solera Criadera system, you're always mixing liquid that was picked at different times. The goal is knowing how long the liquid in your bottle was inside the system, not knowing what year it was picked. Something very specific to sherry. It takes a couple of months for the 2/3 to take on the flavour of the 1/3, normally about 2 months for that to happen, and the target age of the finished product of the wine you're going to consume, that dictates the number of scales. If you're going for a wine that is 30 years old, you can't have 5 scales, you can't have 5 layers of barrels, because wine that's been inside for 2 years, and putting that into something that's been in for 12 years, the contrast, the difference in those two wines is too great, and the 2/3 won't seamlessly take everything from the 1/3, which is the objective. So if you're making a very, very old wine, you're going to have 8, 9, 10, maybe 12 scales inside your Solera Criadera system. Criadera just being the Spanish word for nursery, actually. An industry trend in, let's say, the last 50 years has been for bodegas to add scales, to add layers, meaning you move from layer 1 to layer 2, the 2/3, increasingly frequently, and that of course allows you to withdraw wine, to withdraw your finished product from your Solera more frequently, of course allowing for more sales. That's simply the reason why. In the year 2000, there were 2 new qualifications, 2 new categories of sherries that were established. VOS, Vinum Optimum Signatum, handily also being an acronym for very old sherry. These are those that have been in a Solera system for 20 to 30 years, and VORS, Vinum Optimum Rare Signatum, a very old rare sherry. Those are wines that have been in a Solera for 30 plus years. They are the business. Trust me, it is a drink that is improved with age. Those things, though you're going to pay a lot more, are delightful. Trust me. Another small detail to mention, in Spain, the wine that is destined for export, the word is sacs, the English word, S-A-C-K-S. It's assumed that this word originated from the Spanish verb sacar, to withdraw or to extract. In this context, that makes perfect sense, but that's only a suspicion among etymologists. We don't have concrete written evidence of the evolution of the word sax. Guys, we've worked hard to get to this point, right? We've ploughed, we've sowed, we've pruned, we've grafted, we've been to the lagar, we've pressed with our feet, we have worked hard, we've distilled, we have fermented, we have racked off the lees, wink wink, and we have categorised and allowed our wine to age Now it's time to enjoy the fruit of our labour. Let's understand what are the sherry categories and understand the differences between them to allow you to understand what you're going to order next time you go to the bar. The way I'm going to do this is by starting with what I see as the basic pitch option for sherry, and each time as we enter a new category, I'm going to be showing you how the addition of new variables, new levers you can pull to make a different product, affect what is going on, and therefore what you taste and what you smell. Okay? The basic, beginning with the very simple standard model, is Fino. Basic, simple, most popular wine in Spain. I think about 80% of sherry consumed in Spain specifically is Fino and or Manzanilla. Tío Pepe is the single biggest brand in the world of sherry globally. Think Big Mac, Converse Chucks, Adidas Stan Smith. It is the single name that people from Japan to Jakarta via Jacksonville will recognise. All other sherries, I think, and I used to sell the stuff, so this is kind of how I would go about explaining it. All of a sherry should be compared to this one. It is to Tío Pepe, which is a brand owned by González Bias, the biggest sherry manufacturer, that everything else should be referred. It is with Tío Pepe where you get the purest expression of the Palomino Fino grape flavour and aroma, before we add more variables to make it more complex. A Fino, 2 years minimum, straw-coloured, very pale, very pretty, very elegant, very light on the eye, very pleasing to look at. 15.5 to 17% proof, and the reason why the window for the alcoholic content of this particular sherry is so narrow is because this is a drink that is aged using a biological agent to do the work. And that biological agent is a breed of yeast known in Spanish as flor, flower. The flor, there are 3 subspecies: Saccharomyces beticus, again the word betis, the Roman word for the Andalusian region coming up once again, Saccharomyces querensiensis, Saccharomyces montuliensis, and Saccharomyces rosei, R-O-U-X-I-I, not too sure how to pronounce that one. How does this work? The yeast, being a living organism, a living thing, feeds off the glycerol inside the wine. Now, most sherry varieties that are made with the Palomino Fino grape are considered dry. Again, if you know anything about wine, dry and sweet are the opposites. Glycerol, this particular type of sugar, exists naturally in the must and then remains in the wine as it ages. The flor, which is the distinguishing factor of Fino, feeds off this glycerol. It takes about a month after the barrels of Fino are laid down for the flor to start growing, give or take. The growth is spontaneous and natural and pertains to the microclimate of the sherry triangle. This is the reason why trying to make sherry in other parts of the world has been abject failure. If someone tries to tell you a New Zealand dry sherry, it's a con. Don't believe them. It's not possible. You might think the idea of live yeast eating the sugar inside your wine sounds a bit gross, but this yeast forms a layer over the wine inside the barrel that stops it interacting with the oxygen and the barrel itself. This means that Fino, this particular wine, the driest, the straw-coloured, the wonderful fresh flavour, is not in any way affected by those 2 elements of the process. Thus, like I said at the beginning, the pure flavour of the Palomino Fino grape is locked in and expressed the best with this particular category of wine, thanks to the flor, thanks to the yeast that grows naturally on top of it in this part of the world. There's a relatively new phenomenon, a new craze that marketeers like myself have come up with. It's called Fino en Rama, and en Rama is basically an attempt to make Fino as close as to what is inside the cask as possible. Of course, there are certain steps like filtration that go on after, once you take the wine out of the barrel before you put it in the bottle. En Rama tries to avoid that by having literally the bottle placed next to the barrel and the stuff poured in. En Rama Finos, that yeasty flavour is more prevalent, it's more noticeable. I like it. It is not everyone's taste, but I really, really do like it. Fino en Rama also are cloudier because that yeast is still inside it. There is more visible sediment inside your glass of wine. Some people don't like en Rama, some people rave on about it. The casks, the barrels used for this wine variety, need 10 years minimum of preparation of treatment before Fino can be put inside to make sure that the oaky quality does not taint the Fino at all at any stage. And I mentioned this word Manzanilla. This is Fino, but at the same time not Fino. It is a subcategory of Fino that can be produced only in Sanlúcar de Barrameda. Sanlúcar, tiny town, I've been there, love the place. Facing the sea, it's on the Atlantic coast of the Cádiz province. It's cooler, it's more temperate, it has greater winds. From the Atlantic, it is more humid. These are conditions that the flor, the yeast, absolutely love, and they thrive here. Thus, Fino from Sanlúcar is made using stronger yeast that spend more time eating the glycerol, eating the sugar inside your wine. Thus, it makes perfect sense that Manzanilla is drier. It is the driest wine on planet Earth, so dry it's almost salty, which again doesn't sound good, but it is. This is the drink of the Feria de Sevilla, of the Feria de Malaga. Every May, when the populations have their street carnival and it's hot, they're out all day, stick a bottle of Manzanilla in ice, pour it, put it to your nose, down it, have some wonderful red meat, have some bravas. Delightful. It goes down unbelievably well. Manzanilla it's the same procedure as Fino, but as a consequence of the atmospheric conditions of the climate, the product is different. And I am quite a fan. It's been a long time since I've had one. Oh, God, and I'm looking forward to summer. Gives me the perfect opportunity to dress up as an Andalusian gypsy and get my head rolling on Manzanilla. The word Manzanilla, familiar to some people as chamomile, which is what it means, but also Manzanilla, again, illa, the addition of this suffix onto any word indicates it being small, manzana, so Manzanilla, small apple. I always on the nose with Manzanilla, I get the aroma of a fresh, crisp, succulent Granny Smith apple. Those beautiful, my favourite type of apples, my mouth's watering right now thinking about it. Succulent apples that you can bite into, and that's what I get on the nose with Manzanilla. Normally, a Manzanilla Fino, normally 2 years old. These are the youngest of wines because once the glycerol's been consumed inside the wine, the yeast starts to die. So of all the sherry varieties, this is the one you try to get into the barrel and out the barrel as quickly as you can. Once that yeast goes, of course, that protective layer that protects the wine has gone, which means that your liquid now can start to interact with the oxygen in the air and the barrel. Think of once you've eaten your apple, you leave it on the side. In half an hour, that apple flesh has kind of started to go yellowy, brown and gold. That same has happened to your wine. 5 years plus, maybe 5 to 7 years, you get what's called a Manzanilla pasada or a Fino pasado. This is when the yeast has died and it will start to absorb certain textures to it on the nose, in the mouth. I don't like pasada so much, but some people do. But for the bulk of Finos produced, it's got to be 2, 3 and then sell it on, because the defining quality of Fino is that freshness of the Palomino Fino grape flavour. Above 17% proof and the yeast will die, so it's very important for bodegas to make sure that their barrels stay within that tiny window of alcohol proof. The Solera scales of Manzanilla and Fino are far shorter, again because you want to get the stuff out of the barrel and into the bottle as quickly as possible. The 2/3 of your wine will spend barely a month inside one scale before going to the next one. Once a quarter, I guess, also will work. Food pairings, what would you have a Fino or a Manzanilla with? Whitefish, olives, nuts, shellfish, my personal favourite, mejillones a la marinera, a white wine and cream sauce in which you have mussels with a bit of leek or tomato in there, a bit of black pepper, delightful. The final note of Fino Manzanilla is that a lot of the other sherry categories we're going to be talking about now are a mixture of blends. That's not true for Fino Manzanilla. They stay by themselves for the duration of the aging process. But what about those that are blended? Let's now look at oloroso. Those of you who speak good Spanish will know the word means fragrant or aromatic. You could use the word smelly if you like, but I'd rather you didn't. El olor, the smell, the scent, relating to our English language word olfactory. And the olfactory bulb is the organ that does the smelling. Oloroso made using Palomino Fino grapes predominantly, but some of the wines can be blended into them. These are technically dry wines, but they are sweeter than Fino. because there's a key difference in the manufacturing process, which is the yeast used to make Fino is deliberately avoided with Oloroso, and the process is oxidative. Oloroso is immediately put to 17%. That means that the yeast involved in making Fino cannot survive inside a barrel of Oloroso. It dies straight away. Thus, that protective layer, which gave you the freshness in your bottle of Fino, cannot protect Oloroso from the elements. You make it interact with the barrel and the air. What does this do? It gives depth and darkness and richness to the wine. Again, because there is no yeast to eat the glycerol, Oloroso by definition has a higher sugar content, which affects the flavour. But the variable we're adding here is a different way to allow the wine to age by interacting with the things around it. Therefore, also, Olorosos do have greater oaky notes. You can taste the barrel, you can taste the air inside them. Therefore, with Oloroso, we're adding 3 variables. The length of aging. Do you have an Oloroso for 5 years or 20? If you have it for 20 years, if it's a VOS, or if it's 30 years old, a VORS, you've allowed that wine to interact with the oak and with the oxygen for 3 decades. It is going to be woody on the nose. It is going to be very deep, very powerful. One for 5 years, those notes are going to be lighter and not as pronounced. Another variable, the strength of alcohol. Again, as a barrel of wine ages, more water content evaporates, and the higher proof your end result will be. And the quality of the barrel. Now, we said most are made from oak from the USA. Sometimes some Heidelberg oak can be used in some instances. It's not common, but it is used still by González Bies to this day. That is another variable we can play with to add something different when you put your nose to the glass of Oloroso. Food pairings. What does Oloroso go with? The sweetness and the depth on your nose means that it cuts through fatty meats very, very well. If you're looking for a good wine with a cheeseburger, number one, don't go crazy on the sauces in cheeseburger, but Oloroso will work. Red meat, fatty meats, pork, beef, lamb, game, mature cheeses, stews, soups, any kind of brothy flavour. A pork pie might be fantastic with an Oloroso, I don't know, but that would be my recommendation. Moving on to the next category, or next 2 categories, because they're kind of 2 in 1. Amontillado, open bracket, palo cortado, close bracket. So we've looked at Fino, which ages with a biological process. We've looked at Oloroso, that ages with an oxidative process. But maybe the 2 are not mutually exclusive. Maybe we can have both processes when you make your wine. We can, we do, and we call the outcome Amontillado. The Cask of Amontillado, the famous short story written by Edgar Allan Poe. It is therefore a name that is very well known inside the British market, but the name only came into play in the 19th century. I think Montilla, you can see the word Montilla inside Amontillado. This is a town in Córdoba famed for its own wines. I never tried a Montilla wine, but it is very well known. And Amontillado basically means Montilled. It is taking your sherry and making it like a Montilla wine. That's kind of what the word means. Generally speaking, an Amontillado starts for life as a Fino for 2 years, until we then deliberately increase the alcohol content over that magical 17% boundary to deliberately kill the flor, to kill the yeast, so that it then starts to interact with the barrel and the oxygen. The general unspoken rule is Amontillado should be 8 years and older. There is no theoretical upper limit, but again, you've got to get the stuff in the shops eventually. The variables here, again with Fino, we're looking at the length of nusolera, the alcohol strength, but you're also therefore having the transition date from which you go from biological to oxidative aging, and of course the alcohol proof. 17 to 20% is probably about right for Amontillado. On the bouquet, the words often used to describe one fresh and clean, but often nutty. There is more complexity on the mouth, more subtlety on the nose and tongue. These are dry wines because 2 years under the floor means the glycerol has been consumed. Generally amber in colour, but again, this is another variable you can play with. This is my favourite. This is my favourite sherry. Oloroso, generally speaking, I'm not a big fan of table wines, of regular wines that are very, very oaky. And with some Olorosos, that's their big finish, their big woo-ha. that doesn't appear to me. But with Amontillado, you can put it to your nose and you can notice the Palomino Fino variety, the dryness of Manzanilla, but then you can taste the barrel, you can taste the wood, you can taste subtleties coming through, sort of caramel figure sometimes, but not sweet, which doesn't make sense, but at the same time it does. It's my choice for a sherry if anyone's buying. I mentioned a subcategory, Palo Cortado. It's an odd brand. It's kind of what you'd call accidental Amontillado. Palo Cortados historically were wines destined to be finos, i.e. sitting under a layer of yeast. But then the yeast would die, unexpectedly, without a clear reason as to why the yeast decided to pack it in. But then the Capataz already judged it, saying this is going to be a good wine, so instead of getting rid of it and starting anew, the bodegas, the people working there, would keep the barrel. They would mark it, Palo Cortado, a cut stick. They would mark the outside of the barrel using chalk to indicate this was a fino, but now that's changed and it's going to develop with those oxidative qualities, giving it depth and richness in flavour and bouquet. There is a lot of complexity, a lot of variables in Palo Cortado, but it's hard to make consistently. Generally speaking, nowadays, more than anything else, it's a brand. It is an old Solera which produces good wines. It's a name that's recognised around the world. And bodegas nowadays, even though you can exercise far greater control over the aging process of the wine, people still like to have the name Palo Cortado on the bottle because it really does mean something quite special. The difference, Palo Cortados are going to be stronger in terms of flavour and also alcohol content. And if you are not familiar with fortified wines, or if you don't have the stomach for high alcohol proof, stick to Amontillado. Palo Cortados are heavier wines and can be, let's say, more challenging. Maybe that's a good way to say it. Food pairings for these two, you're going to want meats and dishes that aren't as fatty as what would suit an Oloroso. So the ideal scenario, rich, gamey, lean meats, poultry, mature cheeses, rabbit, certain fish as well, tuna, that type of thing, would balance very well against Amontillado or Palo Cortado. Two more categories to go. And the next variable we're going to play with is back to the grape. We've only explored sherries that use Palomino Fino. But what if we look at Pedro Jimenez and Moscatel? Well, here we are with the sweet sherry varieties. Often these will just be called a Moscatel wine or a Pedro Jimenez, using 100% of the red grape variety. Again, these don't start life as red grapes, but as they are harvested and as they ripen, these will become brownie ready depending on which category. Of these two, Pedro Jimenez dominates, but Moscatel is not as popular nowadays, and therefore not as much of it is produced by the farms. The grapes, we said a while back, the grapes are left in the sunshine in Jerez to dry for a couple of weeks. This allows water to evaporate, and therefore the similarity in flavour to a raisin is not by accident, because this kind of is wine made using raisins. Very high sugar content. Again, fortification, you make everything stronger. These are some of the sweetest wines you will find on this beautiful planet. Easy to drink, pair very well with any kind of lighter desserts, sorbets, vanilla ice cream, maybe even chocolate sometimes, but less complexity. I enjoy Amontillado Palo Cortado more because there is a greater journey inside your mouth. That's a weird thing to say. There is a greater journey inside your mouth when you're drinking it and tuning your senses into what you're tasting. You're not going to have that with Pedro Jimenez and Moscatel. It's a different journey. Sweet, pleasant, delightful, predictable. If I had to distinguish the two a little more, I would say Pedro Jimenez wines, that raisin flavour is more pronounced, whereas Moscatel, it's going to be more of a molasses sugar flavour. The sort of berry quality is not as prominent in the mouth as it is with Pedro Jimenez. And the final variable we're going to play with to get our final category is to ask a hypothetical question. What if we combine the grape varieties? What will happen then? Well, we get what is known in the industry as cream, and your grandma's working up. She heard the magic word. Someone get the Harvey's Bristols. Yeah, give us a second, Deirdre, I'll be right with you. Cream is what happens when you mix wines that are Pedro Jimenez, Moscatel, and Palomino Fino. Blending, which we already alluded to earlier. Blending is the process whereby you take different wines, put them together deliberately in very specific quantities, very specific ratios to get a final product. Endless experimentation has been done, but The brands nowadays, the bodegas, the companies making these wines, know exactly how much of one, how much of another. Something along the lines of 75% Palomino Fino and 25% Padre Jimenez and Moscatel, generally speaking. The Palomino Fino will normally be oloroso. Bodegas don't want to waste amontillados or manzanillas in creams because those are the higher category single grape wines that can be sold at quite a premium. There is lots of idiosyncrasy in cream. If you like your sweet wines, it is quite a fun sherry category to explore because everything we've discussed so far can be a variable you play with to produce a different wine. The most known varieties in the UK, Croft and Harvey's Bristol Cream. Bristol Cream, a blend of 30 different sherries. And in the book Sherry by Julian Jeffs, he alluded to the fact that in the UK in the mid-20th century, there was this nationwide erroneous belief that a clearer alcohol gave a better hangover. Now, biology and chemistry indicates there's no reason to believe this. It is not science, but that's what the market wanted, and that led to a fashion in lighter beer, particularly lager, although there were industry pressures to promote lager over ale at the time, and also clearer whiskey was preferred in the UK market. Food pairings for creams, anything sweet. Figs, dried fruits, strawberries, nuts, chocolate, or meats that pair well with sweet garnishes. Think duck, that type of thing. Could go well with the right cream. But if it's something you haven't tried before and you picked it up at a high price point, sit, get your friends round, play a couple of board games, and just enjoy taking that glass of cream to your nose and seeing what can you pick up. Is there a raisin quality? Can I get a bit of tobacco there? Is there a sort of hint of the oakiness that you would find in Oloroso? What am I getting on my nose here? It is fun. We're going to wrap up with a nod to the history of wine manufacture in southwest Andalusia. We believe the Phoenicians, the Greeks, they were the ones to introduce grapes and wine to southwest Spain in the 6th, 5th centuries BC. There are some people who think the word jerez comes from the Persian town Shiraz, which of course is known for its wines, so much so that we now have a category of grape called the Shiraz. We see clear archaeological evidence of Phoenician remains in Cadiz in the 9th century BC, and up props this name Cera or Jera, X-E-R-A. Theopompos wrote of the town called Cera or Jera being close to the columns of Hercules in the 4th century, so near the Gibraltar Strait basically. There was this town X-E-R-A. We don't know if that was Jerez de la Frontera. People suspect it. It could be another town nearby. There's no clear link, even though people think it is the same town. There is no archaeological evidence of the Phoenicians in Jerez de la Frontera that we have found yet. It is to the Romans where we see the first clear archaeological evidence of activity in Jerez and Sanlúcar de Barrameda. The name they gave to the city, Theritium. It was under the Romans that grape and wine production flourished. Absolutely. The Visigoths, they didn't care so much for these delicate wines of Andalusia, but the Moors, they noticed the global demand around the Mediterranean world for this wine. And while they did not consume alcohol heavily, they were happy to permit wine growers to make the stuff and sell it as long as they were paying tax. Under the Moorish conquest of Andalusia in the 8th century, Seritium became Xeres, which became Ceris, and that, we believe, is the origin of the word Jerez today. The city was a walled, wealthy city, capital of its own Taifa, which is kind of like a city-state in Moorish Andalusia, but then again, pretty much any mid-sized town by itself in southern half of Spain can claim to be a former capital of a Taifa in the period between the 8th and the 11th centuries. Xeres became Jerez in Castilian and sherry in English. It is a myth that we get the English word sherry from the fact that British sailors could not pronounce the word Jerez in the 16th century. That's a myth. Come 1264 AD, Jerez was captured by the Christians. The precise date is not known, and the proximity to the front lines of the reconquest to the Moors means that a lot of towns have de la Frontera, of the frontier, in their full names. So Seritium became Xeres, which then became, in 1264, Jerez de la Frontera, named as such officially in 1380 by King Juan I. We fast forward to 1491. The Dukes of Medina Sidonia issued a proclamation permitting those living in Jerez, irrespective of where they were born, to export wine tax-free overseas. So here we see for the first time As Spain was looking to outdo Portugal in its naval conquests, we see the understanding that we can sell the stuff and that there will be demand for it because this will last longer than the wines from other places in Europe. 1517, 28 years later, we see a specific charter that grants privileges specific to the British in the area to encourage the export of wines from Andalusia. So again, very early 16th century, the British making their mark in the sherry industry, and I'm so glad they did. Fast forward end of 16th century, the British were the big players in the global sherry market. The next century, things didn't go so well, a consequence of the piracy of Francis Drake in Spanish water around Cadiz. Henry VIII and Elizabeth I perceived heresy. Those are the ones rejecting Rome and going their own way to found the Church of England. They were not popular, and therefore neither were the British in Spain, a place that was as Catholic as ever been. And that led to maritime conflict, and sherry sales struggled as a consequence. William Shakespeare in this era, he was a fan of the stuff. Fast forward, Thomas Jefferson, Charles Dickens, they were huge fans of sherry as well. I think I read Charles Dickens used to feed a thimble of sherry to his, do you have a budgie or a canary, I think, and he would give it a bit of sherry every day. The thing lived a long time, so clearly it's good for you. And then in the dawn of industrialisation, railroads were added to the area around Jerez de la Frontera so that the harvest, the grapes, could be brought at speed to the bodegas to minimise loss, to make sure that they got there on time so that grapes did not rot. And I think that's where we're going to leave the episode. I hope this has been entertaining. Since I started this podcast, I've wanted to do an episode dedicated to sherry. Yes, I got there, finally got there. Thank you so much, guys. I hope this serves as inspiration. I hope you now would like to go and try something, maybe for the first time. Maybe now you're going to go and be more adventurous and try different styles of sherry. Of course, drink responsibly. Don't believe that I'm telling you to go and get blotto drunk at every single opportunity. Certainly don't operate any kind of machinery. Final feature, of course, of every episode is our Spanish recommendation of the week. It should come as no surprise in this episode. What I'm recommending you to do is to visit Jerez de la Frontera and go on a bodega tour. Go and visit these cathedrals of wine inside Andalusia. You can enter most of them. I tried to look for a job there, and I would literally knock on the door with a CV when I was 28 frigging years old. And they were gracious people. They would let me come in, serve me a glass. I would love a look around. The two biggest, González Vías, which is probably the biggest company making sherry, and Emilio Lustau, making sherry at slightly higher prestige points. I think they're the biggest. Emilio Lustau on Calle Arcos, that's my favourite bodega to visit. It's a very beautiful one, and some of their wines are my favourite as well, particularly Papiruso, their Manzanilla, delightful. I would advise booking ahead of time. Bodega tours in Sherrylandia are not going on all throughout the day, so book ahead of time, go online, book your tour, do some free sampling, some free tasting, and get back in comments afterward telling me how right I was to recommend sherry. Guys, it's Saturday night. I need to go and have a boogie on down with people here in Spain. Thank you so much for listening, and I hope to see you again soon. Take care, drink responsibly.